nicht verliere wir. Wir haben es geschafft aus eigener Kraft.
And then on the 11th of May, 1994, this local team of the north of this 150,000 inhabitants town of Salzburg is in the UEFA, in the European final, and they play against Inter Milan.
Welcome back from holiday break, Christmas break, New Year's break, skiing break for me. The story we're back with today is a journey to, at least in my soccer biography, to the original sin of commercialization in modern global football. And that's 2005, the takeover of Austria Salzburg, a former Austrian champion, UEFA Cup finalist, and Champions League participant, by a well-known energy drink company that's now active in soccer around the globe. And then that company changing the colors, the name, the history, the crest, basically trying to erase Austria Salzburg. I lived in Munich then, so quite close, and it was shocking to see what could happen to one's club. But more importantly, today's story is a journey to soccer's original grace as well. Community, persistence, humility, sometimes newfound humility, euphoria, belonging, and the resurrection of Austria Salzburg in its original colors in purple and in white, by fans, for fans, and then the return of that Austria to professional football. So why is this club, founded in 1933, called Austria when it's in Austria in the first place? What is it like for a club to be founded in Austria in 1933? That's the year that Austria enters 4 years of homegrown fascism before Hitler comes. Are the hills really alive with the sound of music there? And why is the face of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart on the Ultras banners in Salzburg? Is the Austria really a club of artists and fancy maestros? And how has the relationship between the purple member-owned club and its roots in the north of the city and working club quarters to the energy drink marketing team evolved since the latter tried to kill the former? Stefan Wally is with us today, and he's the man to explain this. Lifelong fan of the Austria and managing director of the Robert-Jungk-Foundation for Future Studies in Salzburg. He has taught at different universities for 20 years. He's a political scientist, studied at Warwick University in England to be close to his second soccer love, Aston Villa, and regularly teaches Austrian history to an international audience. So definitely the right person for today. And he had a lot to say, and I had a lot of questions. And the Austria's history intersects with a lot of cultural and political and economic developments, so we went long. This is almost an hour and a half, and it's all here. I didn't cut it into 2 episodes because we had break anyways. So just be aware, about halfway through we get to the Red Bull takeover. And then in the last third to not an analysis of commercialization. I've done that elsewhere with other guests, but the story of the Austria's resurrection. And before, of course, comes the important core part of that club's history and triumphs, and the schnitzel roll scandal with the police, of course. Wait until you find out. On the stand behind the goal where Austria Salzburg's Ultras normally stand, it's written, "The Austria will outlast you all." And after talking to Stefan, I agreed that's actually quite likely. So here is the unusual and a little prophetic story of one of Austria's truly great clubs, Austria Salzburg. Welcome back to the Assistant Professor of Football. Please do spread the word, click and subscribe. Glad you're listening again.
Well, Stefan, hello. And welcome. We've discovered already we have a few things in common in our connections and approaches to football, but I don't know a lot about what your origin story there is. So what brought you to the game in and of itself? How did you become an Austria Salzburg fan and then came to care historically about the club as well?
What do you mean, how do I came to Austria Salzburg? Of course, yes. I was born into it, like most people who support the team are born into it. So
did your dad bring you? Is that,
yeah, of course.
Same here.
And he brought me before I can remember. He was not, this, I'm born in 1970. And there were rumors that he took me to the game before I was 2 years old. And it seems to have been the ordinary thing to do. He was not a fanatic, but it was the ordinary thing to, from time to time, to attend games at the stadium. And then you knew that you should ask how the team was playing. You were watching football. You were following it. at least where I came from, this is from the city of Salzburg, the northern parts of Salzburg. This is where the bigger estates are. When you meet people nowadays who grew up there, this was the ordinary thing to go there. And it's not that you're brought there. Most of us have been born into it, and this is normal life for us.
Mm-hmm. That's the same with me for Sturm as well, except that I was old enough to remember. I don't think my parents thought it was quite appropriate to go to our old ground. But as a young kid, you went and weren't ruined either. So good for you. This is the old stadium, and we'll get to that as well. Little question here. You still work in Salzburg, and you also straddle the history, academia, scholarship, football a little bit. Tell us a bit about what you do.
Yes, I was born in the north of Salzburg in the district of Gnigl. Went to primary school in the district of Lehn. This was just walking distance around 50 meters to the ground, where I had my primary school. My father was from Liefering, also the north of the town. In this moment, I'm sitting in my offices. This is in Lehn, also the district of the town where the team originated. So this is a strong connection to the team. And I grew up here, and I've, of course, attended schools, studied abroad. I studied at the University of Warwick. I've been working in Vienna, Brussels, and I returned back to the district where my team plays, and I found a job here which I very much enjoy. And I'm a social scientist now, interested, of course, in politics, sociology, and history, evidently, besides, of course, being primarily interested in football. Mm-hmm. And I also teach American students abroad. That might be interesting for one or the other listeners of yours.
Yes, indeed. If they come to Austria, they can hear from you about Austrian.
Yeah, there's a course I teach for the American Institute for Foreign Studies about contemporary Austrian culture. And of course, there is a session on what does football say about the culture of Austria.
And there we are at the right club, properly called Austria Salzburg. And the club and the country, Austria, is not common in many other countries to name your club after the nation you are in. There's often references, the German Borussias and Alemannias, etc. But Austria is indeed a country too. At the time that Salzburg was founded, plays a role here. We'll get to that and try to engage how that football history and the history of the new and tiny Austria that started back then dovetail. And let's get the elephant in the room out of the way right away, or the bull in the room. Most people out there will have heard of Austria Salzburg as its own team, either through the glory days in Champions League and UEFA Cup in the 90s, or through the near elimination of the club by Red Bull in the 2000s, the first stepping stone of what is now the Red Bull soccer empire worldwide. We will touch on that. We will not engage that as the defining mark of what Austria Salzburg is, and also not what it has become since. Been more than that before. It's been more than that since. For now, Austria Salzburg is playing in purple, beautiful colors, I think, same as Goshen College. In purple in the second Austrian league, and we'll roll back history from there. What's the last game you attended, and what's the vibe around the club right now?
Well, I just attended the last game before we had the winter break. It's running very good. We've got good results. We were going up to the second tier this season. Our aim was not to be relegated immediately. Yeah. We don't have much financial resources as opposed to other teams in this town. But basically the vibe around the team is, let's not get bankrupt. Let's just survive in the second tier. And it turns out we are very likely to survive. There are some great results. We've beaten the first Vienna Football Club, one of the most traditional Austrian teams that's also playing in the second tier recently. We won away
the oldest Austrian club. Yes.
Yes, the Vienna Cricketer Club from back in the 19th century. We've beaten them. Then again, it's of course, as it's also in the second tier, not one of the greatest clubs that we currently have. So the season is running well. We are sold out regularly. We don't have the biggest football ground of the city, although not totally surprisingly, but it's a very familiar atmosphere, and it's kind of beyond our dreams. And it's something that we currently very much enjoy. But then again, if we dive into the history of this team, you will see whenever we had big dreams, disaster was around the corner. But of course, we think this time around, it will not be disaster around the corner. But you're going to see there has always been disaster around the corner.
There has been, but let me say this to a contemporary situation. It strikes me that the club is less dreamy than it used to be and more pragmatic in how it's run
definitely.
and in how the fans approach this new chapter in the second league. I don't know if I'm wrong, but...
Yeah. Like many people who are listening to us, if you support a football team, you basically can't avoid to be a dreamer. Kind of the pictures emerge in your brain if you want it or not, celebrating championships, celebrating European glory. The thing about our history was that whenever we dreamt those things and then we forgot what about boring finances has to be done. I hope that one of the lessons, I grasp the history of this team as we've learned certain lessons, and one of the lessons is financial prudence. And I think financial prudence is something that, in this season at least, I've got the feeling that our management is aware of that, and we keep our dreams in check and proceed step by step.
And with a squad that, as you mentioned, isn't financed anywhere near as well as that of bigger teams in that league, and financially there are bigger teams in that league. You're doing remarkably well, holding your own. I was more afraid when I saw some of those summer transfers and thought, go down again, but it has worked out well so far. Yeah. Austria plays in a smaller stadium now, and on the stand behind the goal, the famous placard that says, "Die Austria wird euch alle überleben." The Austria will survive or outlast all of you. We'll get to who that all of you is. But the Austria has survived so far since 1933.
Correct.
And maybe we jump back there. 1933 is an interesting year in Austrian history, period. We have the chancellor, head of the government, who is dismantling parliament and setting up authoritarian structures in Vienna on behalf of what was the Christian Democratic and Conservative Party, but now has its own paramilitary arm. Austria in a civil war situation between Social Democrats and Christian Democrats. And in Salzburg, in all this uncertainty about what the future of this tiny country that came out of the monarchy is going to be, a football club is founded, and it's named Austria. Does that smack of confidence? Is that a hearkening back to old monarchical glories? Why? Why name a club Austria?
Yeah. Philip, just like you said, when we're between the big wars in Austria, this is a period of confrontation. This is a period when people have very staunch political opinions. They are fought out by militias. There is massive disagreement. There is extremism just with every second person you speak to. Now, in this setting, football isn't isolated from society, and it was not isolated from society in Salzburg either. When the first football team in Salzburg was founded in 1914, it was the athletics team. And the beginning of football in Salzburg was orchestrated by children of the middle classes, children from gymnasium. And this social group in Austria was resembling a sociological and political group that was basically aiming for the reunification with Germany, German nationalism in Austria. Loads of these people who went to the trades, the professionals, didn't believe in Austria, but they dreamt about unifying Austria back with Germany. These were German nationalists.
Yes, it is German national, and I think this is post-World War I. Call it trauma, whatever you call it, but this country has been amputated from a massive monarchy down to a small size. Austria is now somewhere between 5 and 6 million, and the idea is quite simply it can't survive on its own.
Exactly. That's what those people believed.
On top of it's an illegitimate nation, and Germany is the real Germany, yada yada yada. But it just can't survive economically, politically. Right.
Yeah. And this German nationalism is very important. For example, teams were founded that were called, Austrian teams were called Germania. And you had this subculture of people who wanted to reunite with Germany. And some of these people really signed up to German nationalism. inside Austria, the neighboring country of Germany, you had German nationalism. Now, this athletics team was, when they subscribed to German nationalism, very soon also subscribing to anti-Semitism. Also, anti-Semitism played a major role in football in Salzburg. The first football ground was orchestrated by a Jewish person, Morawetz, for this athletics teams. And after 3 years, the athletics kicked him out because they said, we don't have Jews in our team. So the one team was German nationalist and anti-Semitic in that period. And it had the resources, it had the middle class behind it, was the dominant team of Salzburg. Now, the First Republic and football in the city of Salzburg was other teams trying to challenge the athletics team. There were very different teams. There were teams based on organizations of the Catholic Church who wanted to challenge German nationalist teams. There were teams of the working class trying to challenge the athletics team. But the athletics team won championship after championship. And kind of because everything was politicized, every football game was about the big story. Can this German nationalist team be deposed by teams representing other social groups? And then in 1933, for the first time, it seemed possible. One of the working class teams, Rapid Salzburg, was capable to go into a league together with the SAK and challenge it in the same tire. But they knew they will not have the resources as an ordinary team from the north of the city to challenge the German nationalist SAK.
Is Rapid Salzburg?
It was Rapid Salzburg.
Yeah, working class club.
It was a working class club from Lehen. It was just 60 meters away from where I'm now sitting, where they were playing. And they had the opportunity to go to the same league as the athletics, at least. But they knew they couldn't survive there against the other stronger teams. And in this context, totally surprisingly, they proposed to a Christian team to unite so that the working class forces and the Christian forces united into a common team to challenge this other third German nationalist camp. So very much a political background. Everybody who was really resembling different traditions of Salzburg football who wanted to challenge the athletics tried to challenge them. There were secret meetings in a cafe in Salzburg in September 33. And then, still in September, Rapid Salzburg united with Hertha Salzburg, just like Hertha Berlin.
That's the Christian background.
It was the Christian team. And
yes.
The reason why a working class team and a Christian team united was to challenge the German nationalist team. And this was the birth of Austria Salzburg. Now, take that in context. If you found a team to challenge German nationalism and you call it Austria, there might be a connection. Then again, it might be that people were on the table who didn't take that so seriously, and they just said, well, we've been called Rapid Salzburg like Rapid Vienna, so let's call ourselves Austria Salzburg like Austria Vienna. And the purple as a color was chosen because actually purple is not a very political color.
Yeah.
But the reunification of Rapid and Hertha Salzburg was to challenge the SAK. So the birth of Austria Salzburg, and in the DNA was, let's unite all the forces to become number one, and the main rival was the Salzburg Athletics Club.
The first win against SAK comes pretty soon, already in advent of that first year, right? So is Austria Salzburg competitive right away?
They were not competitive right away. Of course, the SAK remained to be the dominant club. It's there were wins against them. We sometimes even challenged them in the leagues. But basically, till the 50s, so after the war, the athletics team was the stronger team in Salzburg. But it was the aim. It was the challenge to become number one in Salzburg. You might say, why not trying to become number one in Austria? This was so far off.
Yeah.
Austria Salzburg
there isn't even an Austrian league, we need to tell listeners at this point. So the Austrian league is pretty much a Vienna-based league, and the league that Rapid and Hertha are merging for is a league combined of two Austrian states. The distance is just, and the money isn't there to run a national league. So that's the one league we're talking. It's a regional league that is basically first tier, but also isn't the nationwide.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and when they played friendlies against Viennese teams, it was always a disaster till the 50s. So Viennese urban football was always outperforming these provincial footballers.
Yes. While we're talking about this, working class Christians, German nationalists in Salzburg, right at the border, a little bit farther east, the glory days of the Danube football are going down in Vienna. Austria is plunged into a dictatorship pretty much right away as well. How did that non-political thing, how did that work out?
You know, as your listeners probably will know from you, Austria was experiencing two dictatorships, very different dictatorships. Both of them can be described as fascisms. So the first one is the one that you mentioned in the beginning. This was this authoritarian dictatorship that the incumbent Christian conservative government was installing. Some people call it Austro-fascism, based on strong structures of Catholicism, of conservatism. Yes. Now, Austria Salzburg as a football team was not banned in that period because they had just merged with a Christian team. So Austria Salzburg was considered to be politically undangerous, and they remained intact.
It was never part of the Workers' Sport Federation.
It was part of the Workers' Sports Federation until Rapid Vienna was part of the Workers' Sports Federation. But through the combination with Hertha, they were not anymore. And they remained intact in this first dictatorship. Now, what about the roots in the working class districts? There were working class teams banned by this dictatorship, like, for example, in Maxglan. There was a team called Vorwärts Maxglan, which means like forward Maxglan. And this team was banned, and Austria Salzburg, that was not banned, incorporated their players as an independent team inside Austria Salzburg. So they kept some ties to their traditions, kept those people on board. And from the ranks of Austria Salzburg, of course, you didn't have the key figures for the football federation in the dictatorship. There was one incident that is quite interesting. We've got some excellent people around the club who do a wiki site of Austria Salzburg, and they pointed me to that. There was an invitation of Salzburg teams to play in Nazi Germany in the 30s. And after a certain period, there must have been a political intervention by the Nazis. And they told Austria Salzburg they must not play a friendly against the German team. And only the SAK was able to attend a friendly game in Germany. So Austria Salzburg was then still considered to be kind of okay in that period for the incumbent structures, but the Nazis already knew this is not our team.
After the Anschluss, Austria Vienna renames itself to Ostmark, tries to shed a little bit of that Austrian patriotic sentiments. How does this go for the Austria?
You know, it's very tricky to really to reestablish that. There have been some historians who looked into the period 38 to 45. Now, what we can say is that Austria Salzburg, we don't have any relevant historical document about the resistance of Austria Salzburg, its players and its management against the Nazis. We also must say that the Nazis didn't choose Austria Salzburg players or Austria Salzburg functionaries for the sports federations. As soon as the Nazis took over, the head of the football federation was a guy from the athletics club. In the sports federation, the one responsible for football was a guy from the athletics club. But Austria Salzburg continued to play in their colors and with the name Austria. So it had a relevant part in football in that period. It also had some successes. But basically, like nearly everything, it ended in disaster. And for the first time, Austria Salzburg was not playing anymore. It was in 1943. The war meant that more and more players had to go to the front lines. More and more players died. Austria Salzburg lost 7 regular players in Hitler's war. And the Salzburg teams were forced to join together in a football federation. So we have league tables without Austria Salzburg for the first time since its establishment after 43. So the Nazi dictatorship was the period when Austria Salzburg did not exist independently for 2 years. Now, what do we make of it?
I have to ask you briefly. Do you know how Austria dealt with the Aryan Code?
Of course, in the Nazi period, officially this was. Now, the Aryan Code, probably your listeners know this, German nationalist teams banned Jewish people from the teams like the athletics club team. Austria Salzburg did not do that in the democratic period. If we have a look at the first photo we have of Austria Salzburg, we find a guy there who's of Jewish background. His name is Deinhammer, who was very important for the team. And in 1933, still, Austria Salzburg had no problem whatsoever with a Jewish member of the club on its photo, on its first photo. Well, the Athletics banned Jewish members in 22.
Proactively, well before Hitler.
Well before.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Then again, of course, under the Nazi period, it was compulsory to have paragraphs like this. And we don't have any resistance documented by Austria Salzburg. So there is nothing heroic about that in that period. Mm-hmm. Maybe if you want to find something that at least looks heroic, in the Nazi period, the most aggressive formation of the Nazi party, the Schutzstaffel, the SS, probably your listeners know that, had its own football teams. And Austria Salzburg was playing the SS and twice beat them heavily with 9-2 and 8-0. Austria Salzburg beat the SS in the early 40s. So that is kind of a remarkable date. Historians looked into it, and we even have war criminals playing for the SS in those games against Austria Salzburg.
So we know who played for the SS team.
Yes, we know who played for the SS team.
Good. There's a little story about Salzburg and the 1936 Olympics, you said? Those are in Berlin.
Yeah, it's a story about football in Salzburg. For the Olympic team in 1936, players of the athletics team had qualified. And they were part of the Austrian national team. And there is a very sad photograph of the Austrian national team at one of their games in Berlin, where they all did the Hitler salute. And you had the Austrian national team doing the Hitler salute. And the bad luck was that many people were very proud that athletics players were participating in the Olympics. For a certain period, they took the picture, still after 1945, of the Austrian team with the Hitler salute, which was very disturbing if you saw that after the war. Austria Salzburg players were not involved in that.
The competition comes to standstill in 43 and 44 after the war is over. The Salzburg Athletic Club and the Austria play again, and pretty soon leagues are formed as well. It takes until the 60s for a national league to emerge. But I imagine that clubs from Vienna still loom large. That's kind of the North Star of where you want to be as a regional team after the war. Does Austria reemerge pretty quickly, reconstitute pretty quickly?
Just like before the war, after the war, football isn't just outside what's going on in society. Our football ground was a refugee camp in the beginning. There was no place where Austria Salzburg could start playing. Then again, there was Josef Brandstedt, a very important person who orchestrated the merger of Hertha and Rapid. He now, after the war, becomes head of the Football Federation of Salzburg. So he moves on. We get a new guy with Max Breitenfeller, who's managing the club now. And step by step, Austria Salzburg begins to reemerge. Step by step, they also go back to its district league to play there. And they begin to challenge, again, the SAK. The SAK has survived the Nazi period, still as number one in Salzburg. But Austria Salzburg very clearly is catching up. And it looks like by the early 50s that there will be a showdown. Could Austria Salzburg, we're far away from Austrian first tier, just be the number one in Salzburg. And just before we were close to overtaking the SAK, there is danger for Austria Salzburg again. Our big hero Brandstedt, who's now head of the Football Federation, has a look at Austrian football, and he says, I've heard there are reforms ahead so that Salzburg teams might be able to get into a national Staatsliga A, to the biggest league of Austria. But he, as representative now, not of Austria Salzburg, but of the province of Salzburg, says, the athletics team and Austria Salzburg both will not be strong enough. So the head of the Salzburg Football Federation proposed the merger of the athletics team and its arch rival Austria Salzburg. It would have meant the end of the rivalry. It would have meant the end of the different identities of the athletics team and Austria Salzburg. The newspapers are full of articles. Oh yeah, let's merge. Let's have one unified Salzburg team to challenge Vienna. It was resisted in the end by the traditional supporters of the teams who said, no, this is not possible to merge those totally different teams, the athletics teams and Austria Salzburg. We must keep those teams separate. The newspapers were, oh, come on, how ignorant this is, how petty-minded this is, not to merge them.
Yeah.
And just somehow, the two distinct teams remained to be independent teams with really independent identities. But it was, again, one of these huge dangers that tradition was being eradicated from football history at the price of success.
Mm-hmm. And that's corroded Austria throughout.
Yeah,
I'd say well into the 90s. This idea that each state needs really one team to challenge the big Vienna ones. That is somewhere in the mentality. You see the same thing in Linz in the 90s. You hear the same things in Graz in the 80s and into the 90s still as well, and now in Salzburg as well, even earlier. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The funny thing was that the argument was only if we merged the teams, we have an opportunity to go up to Staatsliga. There was a minor reform that if you win this provincial tier, at this period it was together predominantly with Carinthia. If you win this tier, you have the possibility to go up to the first Austrian league. And after the merger was rejected, first the athletics teams went up and they couldn't compete. But exactly in the year when they went down again, Austria Salzburg for the first time went up. And this was the moment Austria Salzburg became the dominant force of football in Salzburg. And for the first time, they entered the national first tier. And this was in 1953. And now Austria Salzburg, this rather small working class team from the north of the town, is the number one of the city and the region.
In the late 40s, the construction for a new stadium that will become very formative for the identity of the club begins as well in Lehen, a place in the city that you know well. What kind of place is that, and why does it fit the Austria so well?
Yeah, well, there was a football ground in Lehen, which was built by the players themselves for Rapid Salzburg. You know, this is this forerunner of Austria Salzburg, one of the teams that merged into it.
The working class forerunner. Yeah.
Exactly. And they played there. Austria Salzburg then played there. Then it was ruined. Then there was re-established a small ground in Lehen. And they managed to build a ground very close by to the traditional ground. So this was a kind of the second place in that district where they played. And Austria Salzburg continued to play there till the 2000s. And later on, by 1970, a big ground will be established there. So Austria Salzburg is closely tied to this district Lehen. But basically, on a broader scale, it's closely tied to this northern segment of Salzburg. By the 80s, if you were talking to people who supported Austria Salzburg, they would very often still refer to it as the team of Lehen, the team of this district. So there's a very close relationship between the district of Lehen, the north of the town, and the football team.
1950s, Staatsliga. Right?
Now we're number one, correct? Staatsliga A, Staatsliga A. And Austria Salzburg is playing there. There's guys like Günter Praschak who become important players there. Then by the 60s, Tuel Kiebler will be very important. Just some names. And then again, Austria Salzburg seems to be now the dominant team, but this is not something where we were excellent. This is not really a team that can beat those big teams of Vienna yet. But Austria is making its mark on the first tier, and it's beginning to get stronger and stronger. Then by the late 60s, for the first time, there was a transfer of a very good player from 1860 Munich, Peter Grosser, and Austria Salzburg takes step by step. The administration reacts, and the football ground in Lehen, the big one, that allows 18,000 people to watch the games, is then established and built. And the first games there are in 1970-71. Still, the ground doesn't help to be totally successful. It tends to be years of success followed by years of being in danger to go down to the second tier. So when you were watching and when you were following Austria Salzburg, this is rather a team that has its blimps of success, of glory, but it was rather a team that was hardworking and trying to to survive and being threatened by relegation. And it quite suited the life of many people here in the north of Salzburg. This is kind of the real life. You can have success, you have to work hard, you have to make ends meet, but there will be moments of glory, be they short-lived, that's no problem. And this was the experience of that long period of the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. That's a period when Salzburg, as a city of culture, is emerging on the global stage as well. The music festival is reestablished in America. Everybody is watching The Sound of Music. Austria isn't exactly a glamorous team at that time, right? Are there still voices in the city that would say, no, we need one big club. We need one big club that represents the city better, rather than this purple merger team?
Exactly. You're predicting the next disaster that was just around the corner. So we've established ourselves kind of in the first tier of Austrian football, but, football gets more and more professional. First steps towards commercialization happen. I mentioned we ourselves bought players. And by the mid-80s, Austria runs into debt. And guess what? The authorities again say, why should we save every football team that doesn't get its finances right? Let's give up the team. Let's merge it again. Guess with whom? With the team that was the reason for the birth of Austria Salzburg in the first place. They proposed to merge Austria Salzburg with the athletics team, for whom to oppose Austria Salzburg was once established. Now, by 1985-86, again, it was very close to having this done. The president of Austria Salzburg and the president of the athletics teams even agreed. But they both had to have the okay of their general assemblies.
Yes,
of their
those
members.
are member-owned clubs. That's an important
feature. They were all both member-owned clubs, and the members rejected the merger in the 80s. And again, it was like in the 50s. And this is one of the other lessons that we have from the history, that how important it is to have member activity in the clubs, that when there is a general assembly of the team, the people should go there because it's so important to defend the identity. And again, remember, in the 50s, Austria Salzburg and the athletics didn't join, and success followed anyway. Now, by the mid-80s, the merger was rejected, and kind of everybody was expecting Austria Salzburg to go bankrupt. They didn't. It's the rejection of the merger is not the reason for it. But after that, Austria Salzburg went on to go to success that nobody here in this town, let alone in the north of this town, ever imagined.
What would have the colors been of that team, by the way? Do you know? It's blue and yellow for the athletics club, and it's purple for Austria Salzburg. Kind of a pretty combination.
Probably they wouldn't have combined it. I don't know which colors they would have chosen. I don't even want to imagine that.
Yeah. In Graz, it was always, that's the colors of the state that the two Graz teams are in, and that's green and white, and then we have our one local team. Luckily, that never
could have happened. Yeah, could have happened. It was rejected by the members. So member participation is one of the lessons that is so important for the history of it. And by the way, in that period when Austria Salzburg by the 50s, 60s became the number one of Salzburg, also in this period of success, kind of the identity of Austria Salzburg and its history was a bit forgotten. In the newspapers, I found a member of Austria Salzburg speaking in the 80s, and he said, well, actually, we don't know what we stand for anymore. So it's kind of, it's only Salzburg and all the other things that where we come from, which are our districts, which are our social roots. What was our opinion on the integration of people of different religions? This is kind of very proud traditions that we have from our background, from our attitudes to other people. And they kind of didn't play a role anymore. And then it looked as, well, it's just Salzburg, so whatever. And it was very important that enough people maintained a stand to defend these traditions, which always then allowed football teams in general to fall back on a loyal base to restart. And we probably have to come back to this loyal base for restart in a moment.
Yes, we do. Or alternatively, my question was, were in the 90s, then in a big successful era, maybe sporting success papers over those identity questions that later on rise their head again when sponsors and when eventually Red Bull comes in. What is the relevance of this story of Austria's identity in the 80s and 90s when those sharp political tensions that stood there at the birth of the club really aren't quite there anymore? How was that identity question resolved? Or was it not resolved at all, he would say?
Probably it was not resolved, but the rejection in the 80s by many people of this merger, it was not only a rejection by Austria Salzburg members, but it was a rejection by athletics club members too. So the very serious supporters of those teams on both sides knew this doesn't belong together. This has to be kept separate. These are identities that can't be merged. Yeah. Now, still, the 90s then, this was, of course, a period of massive success for Austria Salzburg. Out of nothing, we start that in the second tier, this story. Austria Salzburg begins to win games in the second tier. There was a new intake of rather local players like Hermann Stadler, Leo Leiner. Then a very famous striker of that period that goes a bit forgotten nowadays, Srećko Kurbasha. And from Germany, we signed up Oliver Bierhoff, who later on becomes a very important striker of the German national team. And then Austria Salzburg signs the heroic striker of Rapid Vienna, Hans Krankel.
Yes.
And in some very dramatic games, Austria Salzburg manages to go back in the first tier.
Krankel is kind of in the autumn of his career, we should say, at this point.
Definitely.
This is one of his last big stops, right? And he instantly becomes the hero there.
Yeah, and in a decisive game in 1989 against Spital, which is a Corinthian team, he scored one of the two decisive goals, and we still all know exactly how that goal was scored. And then again, what is kind of a bit sad, Srećko Kurbasha scored the second goal, and Srećko Kurbasha tends to be forgotten because he played alongside Bierhoff and Krankel. Yeah. So there are some more silent heroes of that period. And then it was opened to go back to the first tier. And then in the first tier, there was a kind of football euphoria in Salzburg-Lehn. The stadium was sold out then very often. There was it became fashionable to go to Austria Salzburg again. Imagine that by 1985, Austria Salzburg had an average attendance of kind of 600 people. And by
not uncommon, by the way. I looked at the attendance numbers of Sturm in the 80s. They aren't much better either.
Disastrous.
This is,
yeah. And it moved up in a very short period to around 9,000. So this is a real radical change. And this was inspired by our team survives, and now actually it doesn't only survive, it goes back upwards.
I have to ask, where does the money come from? There's a new president in town, right? There's a bit of new ambitions too. All of a sudden, Austria is buying these players.
Yeah, there is Rudi Queenberger, who's in logistics as a businessman. And in the beginning, he took over the team by the 80s. I told you there were financial troubles. He begins to stabilize the team. And he's really into football. I think that's fair to say. And he allows Austria Salzburg to prosper. Of course, the success is not only his money. Definitely not. It plays a role. And the loans he gives to the team. It's also Otto Baric, a very wonderful manager of the team, and those players that move into the team. And suddenly Austria Salzburg plays for number one of Austria. There was a very short spell in 1971 when Austria Salzburg was moving towards becoming Austrian champion, weirdly enough. But now in the 90s, it's serious. And then there is one season which ends in 92, where Austria Salzburg made most points of all teams of the first tier. And thereby doesn't become champion, but only gets second. Because in that period, there were two steps of the league. There was first the ordinary part of the championship where you collect points, but those points were halved. And then the 8 best teams continued to play, and these points were not halved. And based on this mathematics, Austria Salzburg failed to become champion. And a team of Vienna won again.
Yes.
Like teams of Vienna usually won. And from that period, for the first time, we were not challenging the athletics teams of Salzburg as our main rival. We begin to challenge the Viennese teams. Now, this was beyond our dreams by the 50s or 40s or 30s, but now we go to challenge Vienna. And since that period, we have a very strong rivalry to Austria Vienna and generally to all the Viennese teams because, of course, like you might imagine, we considered it rather unfair not to be champion with collecting most points in 92.
This is the period when I started attending games in Austria, and at the top of the table, there's the two Austrias, the two purple Austrias.
Yeah, and they didn't like each other.
Yeah.
Same name, maybe the one inspired the others. Probably we should neglect that, but probably it's historically part of the truth.
Sense, yeah.
But I remember thousands of people chanting "Nie mehr Austria Wien," Austria Wien, never again.
Yeah.
And it was not in vain, In the upcoming years, Austria Salzburg managed to become Austrian champion. Now, remember the story that we now had. We had a team of working class guys that were not even connected to a pyramid of leagues that might lead to the first league. And now by the 90s, this team wins Austrian championship. So this is a long journey. And for 3 times in the 90s, Austria Salzburg wins the Austrian championship. And this is, of course, many people are attracted to Austria Salzburg. And we begin to have supporters in different parts of Austria.
There's the success in the National League, and there is, we can't and shouldn't get around it, the UEFA Cup run and the Champions League years during that time as well, right?
Yeah, could we challenge the big team of Salzburg? Could we challenge the big teams of Austria? This gets completely out of control. Those people who had been longer following Austria were kind of disturbed by that situation. Many of us had been attending the games in the 80s with 499 others. Now we're confronted by playing international teams like Sporting Lisbon.
Yeah.
And beating them totally surprisingly after losing 2-0 away and then beating them 3-0 at home.
2 teams from the German Bundesliga, Eintracht Frankfurt, Karlsruhe. I remember those games on weekday nights when we were allowed to stay up and watch and see one Austrian team succeed, and all of a sudden the whole country is Austria Salzburg crazy.
Yeah, we all remember that. And then, what you're saying is this already leads to Sporting Lisbon, Dunajskaya Streda, Royal Antwerp, Karlsruhe, Frankfurt. Beating so many teams in a UEFA Cup already means you're in the final. And then on the 11th of May, 1994, this local team of the north of this 150,000 inhabitants town of Salzburg is in the UEFA, in the European final, and they play against Inter Milan. And, in that period, it was 2 games. There was 1 game in Austria and 1 game in Italy, and we lost at home with 1-0. And, still there is a chance left that we become champions of Europe, UEFA champion of Europe, by beating them in Milan. And thousands of Austrians went there. And it looked not bad. We kept it at 0-0. Just if we have 1 goal scored, it might be getting close. And then it was kind of 15 minutes to 10 in the evenings. Marquinhos, a Brazilian player for Austria Salzburg, took the ball and shot from around 20 meters. And it went towards the goal and it hit the left post, but it bounced towards the goal. But it bounced against the right post, and from there it bounced back onto the field. And we didn't become champions of Europe, but we have been in the UEFA final. And kind of what is possible after 60 years in the making.
I remember that shot, and I was not an Austria Salzburg fan in that real sense. I was already gravitating to Sturm and my dad's team. But I remember watching that on TV as if it was, just last week. There's 2 things going on in that period too that I remember and that I'm curious about your thoughts. The one is the rise of organized fan movements. The Stadium Lehen in Salzburg is the first one in Austria that I remember. And it very likely is not the first one, but that I remember flares in great numbers in the stands. And we thought it was so cool. And the ultra groups in Graz were just forming. In Salzburg, they were already a step ahead. The Union Ultras exist until today. At the same time, massive influx in the stand with what you would call tourists today, right? So people that are gravitating to a successful club. I remember when Salzburg played in Graz, you could hear the sound from the away section and you could hear a lot of women who were excited to see your players. on the pitch as well. So what's going on in the stand during this super successful period where you're seeing this explosion of people in the stadium all of a sudden, ultra culture coming in, but also the sudden popularity that this town from one working class part of the city never had. How did you experience that?
Yeah, it was kind of weird. If you were following a team that tended to be not too successful, so when things were done, this was kind of an extraordinary period. And but many people really remember Austria Salzburg from that period, began to join in that period. And one of the things that excited them, just like you say, was this new kind of fan culture. The flares were really massive. The listeners must understand the football ground that we had was a football ground inside the city. There was no parking lots around the ground. So this was next to the ground, some meters away, there were estates where people were living. So this is really an urban stadium. And then the stands were not behind a goal like now very often. A full length of the field was their stands. And this stand, by the early 90s, was not separated into sections. Mm-hmm. So you had one massive stand, the whole length of the football ground. Now, I remember as a child and from that period that there was always the announcement, please keep the stairs free. The stairs must be kept free. But as there were no restrictions, there was hardly any movement possible on the stands when it was cramped with people. Yeah. Now, from a kind of security point of view, if in the midst of this massive ground with the stairs blocked, people begin to lit the flares. Looking back, this was actually impressive, but actually seriously dangerous.
Yeah.
But these was, and television was showing this and celebrating this. This is totally. Years before we had incidents and it was banned. This was a big thing, and everybody was celebrating the fan culture.
People used to say, "Oh, Italian atmosphere," over and over again. That was how it was dubbed. Yeah, nobody was really scandalized by it.
Yeah, there was these supporter groups. We had supporter groups since 1972. The supporters group. We had the absolute supporters. Then we had the tough guys from 92. We had a merger of different groups to the Union Ultra in the 90s. So this ultra culture begins to emerge. Some are rather inspired by British football culture, like in most football grounds. But organized fandom is beginning to play a relevant part at the football ground here.
Mm-hmm. And these three groups still exist. So Absolute, the top guys,
all these
the Union Ultras are still with the Austria Salzburg. That's now in the second league. Yeah.
I think it's fair to say these groups exist, and probably we also have to say Austria Salzburg exists because these groups existed. And this was a relevant factor, not the only one, but out of the ranks of these diehard supporters of Austria Salzburg, the important people came who re-established Salzburg after Red Bull took over the team. But probably we have to talk about why did Red Bull take over the team and how did it come to that?
We do, and that's partly a money story. I have another money question about those 90s too. Quenberger is still president, elected president of the club.
Correct.
I remember Austria Salzburg being way ahead of the game when it comes to marketing and merchandising. Do you know if that ever had a huge impact on the finances of the club? Because we're not far away now already at the peak from financial troubles. Austria Salzburg was the first club in Austria that you could, you could buy a tissue holder that was purple and white or whatever.
Yeah.
Merch stuff is very common nowadays.
You're totally right. There were some guys in the management who really were looking to international standards and improving those things. And we even had a new crest installed in that period because, up to that date, our crest was a symbol of our sponsor.
Yes, we haven't even touched on the sponsor stuff. I listened this past week to the very well-done English pocket Libero podcast, and they talked about multi-club systems. And at one point, they referred to Austria Salzburg and said, well, they've had sponsors before. There in Austria, it wasn't such a big deal that Red Bull took over. It absolutely was a big deal. But also the sponsors before are sponsors in the name. And that's part of the legacy here, too. The first one that I remember is Casino. There's another one before, and there's at least one more after that. And it always influenced the logos, right?
Yeah, the most important sponsors were Gerngross, which was a big shop. Then this next sponsor was Sparkasse, a bank. Then we had Casino.
Which is what it sounds like. It's the state gambling monopoly is what Casino is at the time.
So this, and very often this was, their name was incorporated in the official name of the team. So why do we bother about Red Bull? And it was even the symbol on the crest of the shirt that we bought. There was the symbol of the gambling organization, because nobody took that serious. Everybody said, no, it's Austria Salzburg, and that's what we do for money. But actually, it's Austria Salzburg, and it's our colors, and so whatever. It wasn't taken very much seriously. And when the crest was changed in the 90s for merchandising reasons, well, actually, there was no serious protest. So there was a very strong tradition in Austria to really allow symbols to be sold, names to be sold. But actually, in a very Austrian way, we don't take it serious. And Red Bull took things serious.
Yeah, yes. Austria is, I think, a bit of a laboratory for the commercialization of football at various points in its history. Professionalization comes early, much earlier in the 20th century. But also this thing with the names in clubs and the name and sponsor logos, Austria is very much ahead of the curve on this all along. And so it makes sense that Red Bull does what it does when it comes in, but it also is a considerable break. We shouldn't be fooled by having sponsor names in the club name early on. What Red Bull is doing, you said they're taking it seriously, is something different. How do we get to the point where Red Bull is even needed as
exactly? That's very important. You know what goes up must go down. Some people say. We've had now a journey, sometimes close to collapse, mergers who would abolish the team, but somehow we managed to go to a European Cup final, and then we thought we can stay there. And everybody who's into business knows that the key numbers of coming from a 150,000 town with this social background, well, probably it's not sustainable to always play European finals. Based on that, probably on average over 40 years, you should expect the following, and it's not European final. But we tried to maintain that. And, you could... If you want to go to the Champions League, for example, if you take investments now, buy the right players, then you qualify, and then the money is given back to you. But what if you buy the player for a year and then you don't manage into the stages of the Champions League where you really earn money? So it was kind of a bet in the 90s that we maintain our standard. There was this euphoria that led to the decisions of investment. Some very good players were brought to Salzburg who really didn't play that well then, like Valdas Ivanauskas, a great footballer. He didn't help us much. And then we had them on the wage roll, and we didn't have the income from European football, from commercial success, from merchandising success, if we don't have the presence on television. And this led step by step to massive financial problems. And Rudi Queenberger, who was presiding over this success, began to say, this is not sustainable, this is not sustainable. By the way, there is one thing that we also have to see. In that big period of success, Austria Salzburg was not playing its best games at home. The stadium in Lien was considered not to be fit for European football. Key games of this team of the north of the city of Salzburg were played in Vienna, in the big Happel Stadium.
And in the
of course, this was an embarrassment to the town.
Yes, it is. I think Sporting Lisbon is no. Do you still play Frankfurt?
Lisbon was still in League,
Lisbon is the last one at home, right?
Correct.
Yeah, on that run. And then the Champions League gets played in Vienna too. And the amazing thing is the place is sold out.
Yeah.
In another
we were attracting loads of people who were having sympathies for Austria Salzburg all over Austria. Most of it is gone. Some of those people from that period still support the team. When now Austria Salzburg plays somewhere, it's always surprising how many locals still refer positively to our team. But then again, of course, that's not, when you're from Salzburg, when you're from the north of Salzburg, actually, as soon as there's success, your team moves somewhere else. It was not only positive for all of us. And then a new ground was built. And the new ground was built by the regional government with support of other investors outside the town, like modern football grounds. It was not called stadium, it was called arena. It now could be reached as a very modern ground.
The backstory here too is that 2008, Austria is hosting the Euros.
Exactly.
So that's part of the story too. New stadium, let's move out of the city.
Exactly. And then the management of Austria Salzburg says, actually, you've built the stadium. We're supposed to play there in the future, but actually we're running out of money. And now everybody is panicking. The team has been panicking about the finances, but also the regional administration and other administrators. Oh, come on, we built a huge football ground, and now our team is close to collapse. So everybody was desperately looking for an investor. And there was quite sad stories about sheikhs from the Arabian world who were supposed to take over Salzburg that then didn't really exist like we were expecting them to exist. And it was really a desperate period to save a first tier
That's a
team.
nice way of wording that, who didn't exist the way we expected them to exist. Yes.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah. They didn't.
And everybody was knowing, couldn't we have a local industry that is successful? And probably everybody, I can't speak for everybody, evidently, but all of us were, come on, couldn't Red Bull invest in the team? There was broad agreement. Couldn't Red Bull, like Casino, like Wüstenrot, come into it? We call it Red Bull Salzburg. They've got, we wear their name on our shirts, no problem. And when Red Bull in April 2005 finally gave in and said, yes, we are going to invest in Austria Salzburg, there was happiness amongst the supporters and probably also amongst most hardcore supporters, because we assume this is another episode of having sponsorship.
And we should say it's Red Bull's headquarters, global headquarters, is close to the city of Salzburg. So if you don't know that, that is an Austrian company, collaboration, licensure through a Thai energy drink company. So that's how things comes up. Plus the long tradition of sponsors in the name. So the assumption was we're going to have an Austria in purple with the two bulls on the front of the jersey, right?
Mm-hmm. We were happy for 2 months.
Yeah.
So in April, we heard about that. But in June, they presented the shirts in which they're going to play. And it was not purple and white anymore. The crest was different. Mm-hmm. And when the supporters then began to say, well, that's not exactly what we were expecting, they were proposing only minor things like violets or purple socks for the goalkeeper.
Yes.
Or only minor elements of violet.
And purple then, Adidas logo, I think, was a suggestion.
Exactly. That was one of the... Now, what Red Bull here did, probably it's fair to say, and many people from Red Bull who were active in that period might reflect that they took a very professional stance when it came to marketing their product and marketing a football team. They tried really to go modern textbook. How do you do that? But they were misreading football. I think they didn't really come from the football culture, and they didn't understand how to bring the full football community with them. They really went for investment. They kind of saved the club financially, but they didn't manage to bring the supporters with them, at least all supporters.
They brought in stars from Bayern Munich's orbit a little bit, but marketing-wise, you probably agree, but Red Bull up to this point had been active as sponsor only in what you call more extreme outdoor sports. So climbing, paragliding, motocross, that type of action type stuff. Mm-hmm. It's their first investment in a traditional team sport. And I never thought, even during that period, that they're getting the professionalization that they want quite right.
Yeah. There were some things, and, it's not only about colors. Some people say, well, come on, it's just colors. It was more than that. These colors are kind of the symbol for something more important. Red Bull really claimed, no, this is a new team. They said there is no such thing like an archive.
Exactly.
When you were looking at their website in that period, they wrote for players, their former teams was SV Salzburg. So, like I said, we were called Wüstenrot Salzburg, but everybody, that's no. But this time they took it serious. They really went by textbook marketing, but they were going for product marketing and not marketing in football. And only step by step they tried to get better. But in the end, they created a new product. They really now go for football excellence. Mm-hmm. They really go now for commercial success, commercial professionalism. I think that's fair to say. They go for modern football education. They go for massive corporate investment. They go for streamlined decision making. I think those all would be assets that they would claim. Mm-hmm. And this is a total different story to what I told you. A story about rootedness in the community, a story about team spirit, about in the end, the General Assembly rejects the plan of the management. This experience of going up and down, this experience of having local people playing in the team. So these are. But Red Bull would be much more about being entertained by watching good football. Mm-hmm. And Austria Salzburg is more that you go there to suffer with your friends, family, and team. Mm-hmm. These are two concepts of football. There's no right and wrong, but it was time for divorce. And probably 30% of the people who were watching football in Salzburg said, in this situation of divorce, we go away from Red Bull.
It was about a half season there in the fall where I was at Austria Salzburg. Well, I was at 2 games in Salzburg. One was a game in the then new stadium against Innsbruck while the protests were going on. And I was a student in Munich, drove down to see what's happening in the stands and the banners, the protest, the situation. How does this whole scenario look like? How does Red Bull do football? And then one in the spring at the new merger club between the police sport club and the new Austria. What a change! How was that time emotionally for you? Making the decision, we're leaving this behind. We're leaving the stadium behind. We're leaving this curve behind. I remember the moment when all the groups marched out of that stadium and standing section behind the goal, never to return again. What do you remember from that time, just emotionally? Losing a club is something significant.
Yeah. I always said in history, we always had these periods where Salzburg was close to collapse. In the war, when Salzburg didn't exist, when the first merger of the 50s, the merger of the 80s. Now, Austria Salzburg really didn't exist for us. But there was the decision to be made by everybody who supported the team historically. Do we go with Red Bull and say, no, it still lives. It's just a different name now and different colors, a different crest. And I remember that in that period, I was not in the stands. I was already in my age. I was sitting with friends, having my cold drink. And
we should say you are at games. You're not in the standing section.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and the people I was sitting there, we were talking about it, and it was quite clear, and all of us agreed that, well, actually, no. Every weekend we meet together to watch a team that plays in violet and white that is called Austria Salzburg, and that's not what we're going to change. And this was the kind of decision that we took. Other people and people I like took a different decision. But it was more about principle. And I would say 30%, maybe 40% of the people decided like I did. And then again, the problem was there was no other team. And then, like I told you, what you were mentioning, that the culture of supporting a football team had changed in the meantime. And we had very strong supporters organizations like the Union Ultra, like the Tough Guys, like Absolute, and people like Harald Mittermeier, Moritz Grabowczyk, Thomas Karl were from the stands, people who began to organize a new club. And there were people sympathizing with us, like people in other football clubs. And this is this funny story that people from the Police Sports Federation, actually this was already a merged team of black and white Salzburg with the Police Sports Federation, were ready to cooperate with Austria Salzburg. And what you've seen was then this merger team that after a certain period, only a few months, allowed a team in violet and white to play again in Salzburg. But it was a merger team between the Police Sports Federation and Austria Salzburg. And, Austria Salzburg was never a really clean or sterile team.
Yeah.
We had trouble on the stands against the SAK in the 40s, in the 50s. We had trouble with Innsbruck in the 90s. We had trouble with Vienna. It's these troubles usually, we had these. So it's simply not.
It's not the most easygoing fan base for the police to welcome with open arms.
Exactly. So that was kind of a surprise.
Yeah.
And then again, in the beginning, it turned out to work well. And it seemed like, oh, well, we can go to a team playing in violet and white, and it's now called PSV, Austria Salzburg. So, okay. But then we were again close to collapse. And it was all fault due to the schnitzel sandwich. Yeah, true story. After some months, this was now Austria Salzburg suddenly playing in lower tiers, and we brought 1,800 people to attend the game. And of course, you need to do finances. So,
by the way, we should say this was such a great ground. You'd have to describe a little bit of where you played and what the view is, plus all the wooden stands. Also, great place to light flares.
Yeah, there were different grounds that we played in that period. We played close to the headquarters of the police. Then we played at the former ground of the athletics team. Then later on, this is then the next step. We played in Nantal at the ground of the Union Federation, the Union Sports Club, not the Trade Union Federation, before we moved to Max Klein, where we're playing nowadays. And the ground that you're referring to, this is a ground from which you can see the castle. Yep. This is a ground that is very close to the center of the town, but it's not our ground, it's not our district. But we play there to survive. And in one of these grounds, in this time of the Federation, people of Austria Salzburg sold schnitzel sandwiches. And this led to a crash with the administration of the Police Sports Federation, because catering at football grounds, this is one of the major sources of income of all clubs. And there must have been an agreement that we don't do catering, but they do. And by selling schnitzel sandwiches, they said, you're not good to have pacts with, so they canceled the pact. And this then meant, again, we are confronted by having basically nothing.
I mean, the schnitzel sandwich scandal, as you said, it probably... yes, cause, but also it reveals tensions that probably would have come to light on some other level eventually anyways, right? I always wondered how temporary this arrangement is.
Yeah,
that period.
There were people for the PSV Black-White, like the team was called, like Hannes Wagner. He's one of the great historians of Austria Salzburg. He's one of the person always helping out the team. Hannes Winkelbauer, who was very important for Austria Salzburg. And there were people on this other side of the merger that had strong sympathies. So I wouldn't say it was always doomed.
Okay.
But then again, Austria Salzburg and the police sports, it kind of sounds weird to our ears. But there had been people, very good people, and people who had sympathies for Austria Salzburg on the other side in that period too. Now, the merger was cancelled, and Austria Salzburg now again had to be refounded. And now
Red Bull takes off, by the way, meanwhile, in the first league. It takes them a few years to accumulate titles, but we eventually have this juggernaut that we're hoping for. This is going on parallel. While Austria Salzburg is playing its first game as a new club, old club, purple club, in the, sixth league?
Seventh tier.
Seventh league.
We begin then to start in the seventh tier as an independent team. Then again, we attract many people. So this is seventh tier games, which usually are attended by 30 to 120 people. Now it's going towards 800,000, more than 1,000, and these local teams. Then it begins to go quite okay. We begin to be welcome because there's a nice turnover for those teams. If 1,000 people come, you don't always reject cold drinks.
No, schnitzel semmels too. You can sell a lot of those.
Yeah, so there were some local teams who were really very professional in welcoming us. Others were not so talented with that. But this also meant that in our home games, we begin to have a certain income, and to play in the traditional colors of Austria Salzburg attracts players, and we win the seventh tier. We go to the sixth tier and we win the sixth tier. We go to the fifth tier, we win the fifth tier. We go to the fourth tier, we win the fourth tier. And after quite a few years of success after success, Austria Salzburg is back in the third tier. Now the third tier, then it really gets tough. But by 2013, so this is now 8 years after the takeover of Red Bull, Austria Salzburg is on the brink to go back to professional football. Then it would be only one step to confront Red Bull directly. And Austria Salzburg is playing an excellent season. But there is one trouble. Red Bull set up a farm team in the third tier, where excellent players are playing who come out of the structures of this massive club. And there is only one spot to go up to the second tier. And guess which team occupies this place? It's the farm team of Red Bull, Euphoria.
Yep.
So we might have done it, wouldn't have they placed the farm team there, which of course the farm team played by the rules and they were better than us. But they went up. So in the next year, it would be our turn in 2014. And we really managed to become first in the third tier. So now we get close to Red Bull. But we don't qualify even as becoming first in the third tier. There would be decisive games against the Viennese team from Floridsdorf. And in this playoff decisive games, we lose and we stay in the third tier. And then in the next year, we finally get through to the second league. And in Austria, as you know, probably, definitely, this is professional football.
Yes. Third level is regional, so you move beyond the state level, and then second, and the idea doubtlessly was to march through to the first, and troubles start pretty soon, though. Of course. That second league time was not the promised land.
No. It was great to have games there. I remember thousands of Purple and White supporters going to St. Pölten and other games.
Yeah.
But actually, our ground there in Max Gran wasn't fit for the second tier. Massive investment was necessary. And this had to be done very quick to be licensed for the second tier. And it wasn't quick enough. We had to play games in other football grounds quite far away from Salzburg. We had to rent these grounds. Then people were frightened about these non-clean, non-sterile Austria Salzburg supporters, and we had to pay massive for security measures. And things didn't always stay peaceful. This also drove the prices up. The supporters gave their private money to compensate for these fines, for these costs. But overall, finances began to deteriorate very fast. And kind of at the middle of the 2015 season, it was clear Austria Salzburg is moving towards bankruptcy, towards serious financial trouble. And by the middle of this year, Austria Salzburg was again close to collapse and debt. Coming back from nothing, we were close to going really up. Now everything crashes. And we were fined, points deducted, sent back to the third tier, having no money for expensive players, going back to fourth tier. Still, all over this period, there was looming the threat of financial collapse. In that period, it turned out again how important it was to have this strong identity, and that people said, it's not another local team. Out of all these experiences, there were hundreds, maybe by the thousands, people who really identified now massively. So we didn't have a lack of identification with the team. And this also meant that more and more people were ready to give private money. And in a strong attempt, the team and the club was brought back into the field of healthy finances.
With a lot of supporter fundraising going on as well.
Yeah, and we had a lot of international support, by the way. Your listeners know about Union Berlin. Yes. A first-tier team of Berlin invited us for a friendly, where the finances of Austria Salzburg would have a boost from, but many other people supported us. And Salzburg began to slowly climb back to stable finances and re-establish it in the first and then in the third tier. What we've learned now is, again, how important it is to have people who identify with the team, how important it is to have a common story, what this is good for. Why not let it go bankrupt? What is this in the first place? It's not the best team of Salzburg, so what? It's not about being the best team of Salzburg. It's about being the team of the north of Salzburg that has a special tradition, that is not the SAK, that is not a Viennese team, that is not Innsbruck, that's a democratic club where people can stop crazy ideas in the General Assembly. all these things that make up the identity. It's a team where supporters clubs play a major role. Mm-hmm. And it's a team, what we've learned in that period, that goes for prudent finances. All these steps that we spoke about really added something to the identity. The identity of this team is not only coming from the first years. Every generation adds something to this tradition. And if we keep those traditions, those experiences of former generations and hand them on to current generations, it really adds up to a strong identity, which allows you to survive dangerous situations like in 2015, 2016, when we needed the support of hundreds of people who identify with the club to keep it running.
The Austria no longer plays in Lehen. What does the lingering stadium question do to that identity piece? I mean, there have been years when the speculation was, well, we want to go up, but can't. The city won't do anything for us stadium-wise. The city wants you to play in a suburb. Now the Austria is back in a stadium that's kind of, you made it work for the second league, but still may not be a long-term prospect. How's that question of a home lingering in the club?
Yeah, that's of course very important. We currently can host 1,800, slightly more people to watch the games.
Yeah, it's not a lot for you.
Yeah, we're very often sold out. Mm-hmm. We could sell more tickets. And of course, we're playing in Maxgan, something that already is, we like it there, but it's not really fit for the next steps. And we had people associated with our club that made proposals for different grounds. They had been rejected by the city administration. One of them was close to the motorway, which would be an attractive project, which also included housing. We have to say Salzburg has the problem that this is extremely expensive place. Many people want to live here. And we have old decisions to maintain huge green areas to stabilize the quality of life here. But the quality of life by having green meadows around the town means at the same time we have less places to build flats and therefore high prices. And wherever you can build something, there is massive competition between housing, commercial interests. And therefore, the prices also for a football ground are quite high. So this is different to other towns, and it's a serious problem.
And the housing questions, we should say, have led to Salzburg being the second city in Austria where the Communist Party is very strong in the city's parliament. I think that's
exactly that's one of the
politically as well. Yeah.
One of the effects that we had here. Then again, there is a kind of agreement in the city administration that there has to be done something about Austria Salzburg, but it seems to be a long-term prospect. So there is support. We don't know how serious it is. It depends on the economic situation. Is there enough public money? Of course, the supporters can't build the football ground. This is beyond their finances as an Austrian second-tier team. So yes, it's a lingering question. Then again, last year we won the third tier. And based on this, we're for the second time in the second tier of Austrian football. And we were allowed to go there. And our football ground in Maxglan passed the tests. We're allowed there to play there. Of course, there were investments done. Very often investments are done nowadays also by volunteers. Mm-hmm. This is a team where many people identify. There are many people who work in their spare time for the team, be it in catering, ticketing, fan shop, and even, repairing stuff. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot done in the football ground in Maxglan, and it's very beautiful. And many of your listeners are welcome to come here and join in this very traditional football atmosphere that we have here. Yeah, and it works now in the second tier because we did this investment, and the second tier slightly changed their rules. So it was slightly easier.
The infrastructure standards, right?
Yes, so it's slightly easier, and therefore we don't have the handicap of 2015 where we didn't match the standards during the first games. So there was a better start this time, and this additional risk of having infrastructures investments necessary was not necessary. Klaus Salzmann, who's our current president, does an excellent job there, also with attracting investors. And we've got loads of excellent people who really seem to take this step this time with lots of prudence. I don't think in 2015 that there was anybody having bad intentions. It simply spiraled out of control. But the task then and the speed and what happened in that period, this was really a multi-layered problem in 2015. And, like I said about identity, we learn generation by generation. Also, we learn how to go into a second tier generation by generation.
Mm-hmm.
And we're now in this second tier. And last year, actually, it's 2023. So it's 2.5 years ago. It just feels like yesterday. We had something else very spectacular. So we went up last year to the second tier, which we play currently. But 2.5 years, we had a very big moment. 2.5 years.
That would be a great, like the circle closing, kind of loop is closing here kind of story.
Yeah.
Yes. Tell us about it.
So Austria Salzburg, founded in 1933, having an identity, always being threatened to be abolished, not existing under the Nazis for 2 years, threatened to get out of business by mergers in financial troubles, threatened to go out of business for financial risk, threatened to go out of business because of a takeover of Red Bull, threatened to go out of business for financial troubles in 2015. And then, like a symbol, Austria had survived it all. Like we've been predicting, like it's written on our stand. Austria wird euch alle überleben. The Austria will survive us all. It will be handed on generation by generation. The traditions, the ideas, the spirit, the family. And then we had this big moment that one of those who were one of the reasons why we nearly stopped to exist, Red Bull. Red Bull was drawn as our opponent in the Austrian Cup.
Yes.
And of course, this was a big thing. We were playing the farm teams of Red Bull in the lower tiers. We sometimes won, we sometimes lost. But then on the 26th of September, 23, we were playing Red Bull.
At home.
We were playing at home, but our football ground had no chance to host the many people that wanted to watch this game. So this was now really coming to a showdown. You said, why do we speak about Austria Salzburg? In modern football, we have a confrontation of traditional football culture and modern professional commercial football. In Salzburg, in a town of 150,000, this is all condensed. And all this confrontation is now condensed in one game in September 23 between Austria Salzburg, the traditional team, and Red Bull, the professional, modern team. And it's exciting just viewing the days. All the weeks up to the game, every day there's news in the newspapers. You saw the graffitis in the towns. You saw special security meetings. This is now all coming to a showdown. And it was a wonderful game that we played in Grödig, in a football ground that hosted more than these 1,800 that we can host in Max Glan. And people were celebrating it. Long before the game, the people were celebrating in the town, outside the stadium. There was a massive majority of Austria Salzburg supporters, but there were also Red Bull supporters there. And it was a wonderful game, and I'm not going to mention the result. For us, it was enough that we were close to challenging them.
Yes, you were. And we can mention another result. And I think it may not have looked like for you who was inside this, but I think for many casual Austrian football observers, that game marks like the for real return of Austria Salzburg. Not just that game happened, but also how it happened. What the atmosphere was like, that what all the media wrote about violence, that did not happen, and that we saw a festival of football that evening. I think it was a remarkable moment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also experienced it like that. So it's, everybody was frightened. Can you imagine how emotional that is?
Yeah.
This is playing those who took over your team. You would have lost the team that you went to every weekend, that you were supporting, that you were trying for as a child. And now you confront those people. And, everybody was frightened that these emotions might get out of control. There will be cold drinks sold there and massive emotions. There might be provocations from the other side because provocation is a part of football. But everything stayed peaceful. And this was very important for many aspects. Of course, to stay peaceful means that people get injured. No innocent people get involved in fights. So this was all safe. And it really showed to the world that this is a very adult, traditional, rooted, cultured football team that has a proper spot now in professional football.
I failed in my research to find the quote again, but I read something before that game. And I think it was by your longtime capo, Salvatore. I'm not sure. It might have been him. So I don't want to falsely attribute it. But it was somebody from the curve, from the organized fan scene, who said that, yes, Red Bull, but there's a sense in which we're almost over that tension as well, and in which this game is mostly really about showing off our journey, what we've become, our club, rather than lead with that pitch of the duel between the thief and the robbed. It sounded remarkably mature, what was said in that interview. Are you there as well at that point, or is that projecting a little bit?
No, that's
we're kind of beyond this. We now have our own story, and that's what we're really here for.
Yeah, I think this is what these people like Salva from the Ultra movement, or President David Rettenbach, who does an excellent job, what they always say: we have to be self-conscious. We are a team with our own positive traditions. We're a team with our own positive experiences. And this is, of course, the most... We are not the gang who want to do damage to Red Bull. That's ridiculous. So we have a positive identity, but like every identity, if my identity is black, you don't only see black if there is a different color. So you have to see the difference to other teams to shape your positive identity. And we are not the athletics team. We are not Red Bull. We're not one of these Viennese teams. But that doesn't mean we have found it to give them trouble. But thereby I can show you how we are different, how we do things differently. And we should do things differently than many other teams. So there's a positive identity that we can contrast with other teams. And I think that's something different than we just want to do payback. Nobody wants to do payback. We want to be an alternative. We want to stand and symbolize in this city this different tradition of culture, a football culture that is rooted in community, that is rooted in solidarity, that is rooted in the spirit of clubs, that is rooted in the spirit of supporters playing an important role, that is rooted in the spirit that everybody can come here as long as he supports this team. So there are so many aspects that are positive aspects. And rivalry is okay. Rivalry is not a bad thing, but it must not be the reason for existence.
And there's a whole other derby looming out there with Innsbruck, and you possibly meeting in the same league again soon. So that's the real West Derby. You said you didn't just come. Austria was always there in your life. You passed it on to your daughter?
I both took my children to the football ground. My son is now very active in one of these groups, and he's living Austria Salzburg even more intense than I do. So he will be the fourth generation of people here supporting that team. And I'm very proud that he does this.
Ah, that's lovely. Yes. Yeah. If we were to talk again in 5 years, what would have had to happen in those 5 years for you to be able to say it was a good 5 years for Austria Salzburg? Where do you ideally see that club in 5 years?
If everything works out fine, if everything works out excellent, within those 5 years, I can read in the newspaper that the city of Salzburg took decisions that a football ground will be built in the upcoming 4 years, close to a public transport system, close to the city of Salzburg. It will take still some time, but everybody's agreeing on it, and now we take the next steps. Austria Salzburg in these 5 years had some excellent games and excellent results in the second tier of Austrian football. Maybe we've been close to the first league once, maybe we've been up and went down again, that's just fine. But we begin to scratch closer to the first tier of Austrian football. That could be possible within 5 years. I go to the general meeting of our club and I hear about the finances and I look at them critically and I'm of the opinion they do a good job. This sounds like it's sustainable. And then there are single games in which we come back after being 2 goals down. There will be games in which a young player for the first time plays and immediately scores. There will be games where somebody who hasn't been attending a game but sitting in the row behind me comes back after 3 years. I've not seen him. There will be a story about a friend sitting in the stands next to me who has been ill and he returns and he tells me he's healthy now. There will be stories maybe within those 5 years that I will hear about new people going up in the ranks of the team, taking responsible positions in the team. This is all the positive thing. It's about sporting success need not be too much. Infrastructure progress need not be too fast. It's about the people enjoying football, being passionate about it, and having a sustainable move forward. Like real life is for people from the north of Salzburg. We try to work hard, make ends meet, move to the next step, believe in principles. That's how to see life and how to see football.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That may have been the best answer I've gotten to a 5-year scenario question yet.
Well, it's
the one that talked the least about
Salzburg.
Sporting success. Yeah, no, that's great, and very much echoes how I want to see my football as well. Wonderful. Anything we forgot historically?
Loads of stuff.
I bet. Yeah.
But I think it's, many people could tell this story, and probably it's just one example about how important football is really for people, and that it's not only about sports success, that it's about identification, community, solidarity, managing things together, failing together, dreaming together, being surprised together. Many people can tell this story, but here in Salzburg, it's a story that was really threatened by the other side of football, by this modernization and commercialization of football.
It's a bit of a ground zero for other clubs who, after your Red Bull takeover, encountered similar impulses of modern football coming into their club. Not always as spectacularly and as quickly as you've experienced it and as traumatically. But they're there. And I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from your story as well over the last decades. And then I hope one or two of you give the second Austrian league a look as well. Next time you see it's on, check out where Austria Salzburg is in the table, or follow one of the links I put in the show notes to get a bit more of a sense of the vibe in Max Clan these days as well. Thank you so much for the history and the insights and the positive vision today.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for allowing to tell the story of Austria Salzburg to your listeners.
Be well, Stefan, and all the best to Austria Salzburg. And
best wishes.
I know I'm a Sturm fan. I mean it.
That's
I think you'll agree it was worth sticking with it and listening to this remarkable story of what on the surface of things is just the second league team in Austria. Very different place. In 2 weeks, we're traveling to explore how American college soccer and its international student athletes make it work. Until then, have a good 2 weeks. Be well, share, subscribe, and like. And I look forward to being in touch again in 2 weeks.
Did the recording work?
Ooh. Yeah.
Yeah, because I
Well,
just
says recording.
saw the